Welcome to our first Lunch and Learn series. I'd firstly like to acknowledge the custodians of the land and pay my respects to the Kulin Nation as the land that I think many of us are on. Today is the first in a series of 8 conversations with a different on-the-ground specialist each week. Today we have Doi Lee, Ecologics Industry Lead, and Bo Christensen, Sustainability Manager from the Western Program Alliance in the Level Crossings Program. Welcome and thank you to you both. The session will run for 30 minutes, including 10 minutes for questions at the end. Shoot through your questions in the chat, and anything that's unanswered will follow up after the session. We're going to record this session, so it will be uploaded onto Ecologics Knowledge Hub, should be available on Monday. And I think we'll jump straight into the session. So over to Doi and Bo.
Wonderful. Thank you, Cheryl. And again, I do want to thank everyone for jumping on today. I know it's been between the wild weather and whatnot and being a Friday. I appreciate everyone dialing in. So I think it should be a great conversation. So my name's Doi Lee. I am the industry lead with Ecologic. We're a team that's here to really support the implementation of the Recycle First policy, as well as obviously transition construction towards more circular business practices. And it brings me great joy to introduce you to Bo Christensen from Western Program Alliance Level Crossings. Bo, did you want to say hello and introduce yourself?
Thanks, Doi. Yes, I'd love to say hello. Hello, everyone, and I'm glad you could join us. We're really happy to have some people listening to what is a big topic for us. So I'm just really pleased to be able to talk about some of the good work that we've been doing on the Western Program Alliance, looking at concrete, one of our big topics.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Bo. So look, I think the statistics is known to everyone. Concrete apparently is responsible for 8% of all carbon emissions globally. So can you tell us a little bit about what you've done on your project to try and mitigate some of that?
Sure. So the question is, what have we done to reduce the impact of concrete? So the biggest bad for concrete is the cement content. So our project that we're talking about, or the outcome we're talking about, is using supplementary cementitious material to replace cement. That's the basic premise. And the project was basically having to provide Vic Roads compliant structural mixes that were able to achieve a high supplementary cementitious material content. And that was where the whole thing started from.
Fantastic. So can you give us some details around the project and perhaps the specific applications?
Sure. So we actually had a concrete working group that was put together must be getting about a little bit more than 12, maybe even 18 months ago. That was specifically looking at the challenge of meeting Vic Road specifications. And we then had, as part of that working group, people who were durability experts. We had site engineers, we had structural design engineers. We also had people from the concrete industry itself. So suppliers, we engaged with them. And we then had obviously a whole lot of interested people from sustainability that were brought in, and there was a working group, and it was really identifying what standards we needed to comply with, and if there was any potential for getting a Vic Roads approved mix or mixes that were able to be used across all of our projects. We didn't have a particular project in mind at the time. It was just, how soon can we get these mixes done? How can we get them into a project? Was really sort of like step 2. Step 1 was just getting the mixes.
Fantastic. So what recycled material did you end up deciding on?
Great question. So in concrete, there's a whole lot of stuff you can do. But if you're looking at it from a commercial scale, what can you actually do? You really sort of come down to the two obvious ones. One is fly ash, and the other one is slag. And so that's what we did. Through the process of investigation, we found that the tertiary blends, so 3 with cement, fly ash, and slag, were the ones that were going to get us the Vic Roads complying mix, and also the highest supplementary cementitious content. So that was really where we ended up.
So with that, is that mix, is that an innovation, or is that business as usual?
Certainly it's not new. I mean, fly ash and slag are very, very normal things that you would end up with in concrete anyway. It's just a question of how much can you put in there. And the trick was, again, I'll say this many times again, a Vic Roads compliant mix. There are lots of mixes out there that that are really good and probably as good as the ones we came up with, but they're just not Vic Roads compliant. And that has to do with us then having to go through a matrix of looking at the bridges standard, because a lot of the level crossings work involves bridge structures. So there's the bridge standard, structural standard, as well as just a general structural standard, as well as the Vic Roads requirements. And they have a whole set of requirements depending on what the use is. And when you stack these things together, you narrow down what you can do. Yeah.
Great. So what was the final mix that you decided on?
So we looked at all the structural mixes. So the workhorse is the 40 MPa. We also looked at 50 MPa and also 55 MPa. And within the 40 MPa, there's the normal 40 MPa mix that you would use for general structural uses. And then there's also, there was a piling version. So we end up with 4 structural mixes. And then as an added bonus, we then also had 15, 20, 25 and 32 MPa non-structural mixes as well. Now they're not really that controversial because they don't have, because they're non-structural, they're not Vic Roads. There's just some general sort of structural requirements, standards that you need to comply with. So yeah, 40, 50, 55, 40 being the workhorse, if you want to call it that, by far the most common one that will be used for just about everything.
Great. So in terms of, was there any particular advantages with picking, those CSMs, perhaps compared to others, apart from compliance?
Not really. It was really, well, I'll say not really. If you achieve high SCM content using one or the other, you run into issues to do with workability, slump, and also how long it takes things to go off, so to harden or set. So by using a tertiary blend, it's like a sweet spot where you get a good time for these things to go off. And one of the issues which we did encounter, which even though we used a tertiary blend, so slag and fly ash, was that in colder weather we weren't able to use them for larger pours where there was a time constraint. So surprise, surprise, in winter it gets cold, and cement, one of the reactions cement has is that obviously it warms up and it makes the concrete harden. So that if you reduce the cement content, this concrete takes longer to harden. So unfortunately, we weren't able to use the mixes that we had in some circumstances. We could have added accelerants, which is totally fine, but given that we're again operating in the Vic Roads compliant area, everyone's very leery and gun shy of doing anything that hasn't been fully vetted and fully approved by everyone. So unfortunately for us, in the first uses of these, we didn't get to that part of the investigation. Not to say we won't, but that's the next improvement, I guess we would come to, is being able to use the mixes in colder environments. Yeah.
I think you've sort of half answered my next question, Bo. So it's not common in practice. What was the process like to get this into the ground then?
So it's a long process. Concrete, after all, is the thing that gets left behind. It's the sort of makes up most of the structure. So you really want it to be doing everything it's needed to for the 100 years or more that the structure is going to be there for. So you just got to make sure that everyone's during the process is buying in 100%, and that you don't leave anything out, because you'll get right to the end and someone will raise a question, and if you haven't done your due diligence, you'll trip up over it and you'll have to just revert back to whatever the normal practice is. So we just made sure that we asked as many questions in the process as possible. We were fortunate to have a very good supplier to work with, who were able to respond to a lot of questions along the way. And so that when we actually got to the use of it, we had everyone on board. Everyone was aware of the fact we were using these. It was going to be a little bit different in the end. Say for piling mixers, there was no impact at all. There are circumstances where, say, you're piling, if you've got like a really tight sequence of works and your piles are very close together, and so you'd be drilling out one pile, and in the process of fitting that off with cages and maybe even filling it, you're drilling another one. If you're that tight, if your pile mix is not setting very quickly, then again, you're going to have trouble. And then you would need to plan ahead, and you would say, I'm going to do every second or third pile, and then come back and do the other one. And you just have to sequence your works. It's way too late to be doing that when you say, oh, this is the concrete we're using, it has these properties, and then no one's going to like you. So you need to know what it is, the characteristics that are inherent in that, before you, say, get the site engineers planning the sequence of works.
So you've mentioned site engineers, suppliers. Who else was involved in the process? Like, what are the stakeholder considerations?
So good question. For us, the main stakeholders outside of the engineers were we had MTM, who were part asset owners of some of the structure. We also have Department of Transport. We also had local council. So we needed to bring all of those people on board, given that they were sort of like secondary in many ways, because by far and away the most important other stakeholders get on board, and they're sort of like an approving stakeholder, were Vic Roads, because they're the ones that had to approve the mixes. So until we had the final certificates from them, we really were just having to wait. So they are very, very important stakeholders. The engineers absolutely are super important as well, but it was all the design engineers as well that needed to come on board. So it's not just like the main structure ones, but also like the pavement designers. I haven't really spoken about the non-structural mixes, but we were also looking at like reducing the use of reinforcement in the like pavement, the like sidewalks, SUPs. So we were looking at using e-mesh in there as well, and so we needed to bring those mixes in with the e-mesh, which is plastic fibers basically, and that changes the chemistry. So we needed to then we actually ended up not being able to use one of our specific HSCM mixes, but we used a Wholesome EcoPact mix because it had the right chemistry. Slight thing, I would never have thought that chemistry was such a big thing in concrete. By taking out steel and putting in plastic, I would have thought, what's the difference? There is a difference. And so again, you need to do these things well in advance, so you don't get caught out in the end. You think you're right, but then you're not.
So other than and look, I'd be at a loss. So chemistry is certainly not my forte. So what challenges?
Neither here.
Just what challenges and barriers did you face, and how did you overcome them?
I guess we didn't actually have any particular barriers. Probably the biggest one is time. Just getting things done. But we had great support. I think in the level crossings program, reducing emissions, embodied emissions in our materials is a really big focus, and so there was no real resistance from everyone. If anything, people were wishing us well, and all the people that you thought sometimes that are a little bit reticent because they're conservative in their viewpoint, we didn't really have any particular issues with them. Barriers. One potential one that came up was cost. As it turns out, cost is actually minimal. As far as additional cost, it was about 1%, less than 1% additional cost. And the thing that would impact the use of the material as a barrier, it depends on who your supplier is. So we were working with Wholesome in this instance. I mean, they're not the only ones that can do these, but they were the ones we ended up working with, is where their supply plants are in relation to your projects. So depending on where it is and where you are, then you may not be able to use it because it's physically just too far away, and you need a supply that's closer for timing, again, curing of concrete, and just pure economy. The benefit that you gain by reducing the cement content, which is a reduction in emissions, you may blow that completely out of the water by having to travel extra distance with a very heavy concrete truck and then driving back to the plant again. So there is a little bit more to it. It's not just the concrete. It's also where is the plant, who's the supplier, and where is the project. That also comes into it. And then the actual plant itself, like I said, it's a tertiary blend, so slag and fly ash. There are a lot of plants that may only have slag, or they may only have fly ash. They're not necessarily set up to do both.
Yeah. So other than that, any lessons learned that you can share?
Make sure everyone knows what you're doing, I think, and get everyone excited about the fact that you're doing something fantastic. And really, just anyone can trip you up that along the way. It can be like the most mundane thing. So all the people that are going to be touching this process, you need to make sure that they are aware of the fact that you're doing this thing, and that they are an important part of the delivery of this thing. And then you will make sure you reduce surprises, which is a good thing, and you also then make sure that it's a smooth end-to-end process where everyone's supportive and looks out for something. So if we're encouraging site, we're not mandating that this is this concrete to be used, but by socializing it really widely, you have lots of eyes that are on it and are sensitized to what it is you're doing. And if someone forgets or is just in a hurry and doesn't specify this mix, someone else is go, hey, why aren't we doing this? And be, oh shit, oops, I forgot, my bad. Whereas if you have it nice and wide, you mitigate against that.
Yeah. So on that note, is it I assume that's the concrete in the photo behind you there, Bo. Is it now common practice across Western Program Alliance? Are you continuing to use this mix?
Yep, absolutely. So the first project we were able to use this on was the Old Geelong Road level crossing removal, which is still pouring concrete. Most of it's completed now, but they're still using it. And we started November last year. We started to use this, and it was first used in piling mixes. And so to the extent that we can make it BAU, so obviously there are supply agreements in place. They're not exclusive, but yes, this is common practice. We're also using it down in the Cranbourne line upgrade, down in Dandenong. We're also using it in Williamstown. We'll be using it across a whole number of other projects. And we also encourage the subcontractors who come in who may be supplying their own concrete. We try and impose our requirements on them as well, so that we say we would encourage you to use this mix, and then again get in early, because the rates that they may quote for concrete supply may be not what you have allowed for. So if you get in early, you can make sure the contract includes the rates for the HSCM concrete.
Right. So did you have any other final pearls of wisdom for the audience?
I think I've got them all out of the way, really. But I think broad stakeholder engagement is the key, I think, and a clear reason why you're doing it, in case anyone's slightly hesitant. But again, this one seemed to be pretty straightforward. Everyone could get their head around why we were doing this. So yeah, I think I've said all the pearls of wisdom.
Wonderful, thank you. So we do now invite questions from the audience. So we've got 10 minutes to go. So if anyone here has any questions, feel free to pop them into the Q&A or the chat log, and Bo and I will do our best to answer them live. So over to you. Yeah, I've got my first question here from Andrew McLennan. What is the highest percentage SCM achieved, and for what application?
G'day, Andrew. The highest SCM that we got, I think, was 61%. for a piling mix, 40 MPa.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And that was so that was a really successful. We had no issues with it. That was the first time it was actually used. We were kind of going, please don't have any issues, and there were no issues, so that was good. Actually, the slide, I think it's the first intro slide showing a bucket getting filled out of a truck. That's actually a bucket feeding down into a pile. That's actually one of the first pours. Yeah, that one there.
Thank you. I've got a question here from Tony, our Fearless Director. Have other recycled materials been considered or used for non-structural concretes?
Yep, that's a good question. So yes, absolutely. The biggest ones that we also have that are part of the mix, pardon the pun, is glass sand. So we do try and encourage the use and specify the use of recycled glass sand. So you can go up to 30%, and I think it's a 703 standard has just recently been updated to say that you can use 10% of unwashed glass sand in concrete. I think that refers mainly to non-structural concrete, which is great news, because obviously there's a lot more unwashed glass sand than washed glass sand. It's a finite resource, and you use a lot of water to do that washing. But yeah, that's the main one. Thankfully, recycled water seems to be the common water use in concrete these days, which is good. But we're always on the lookout for new things. But the biggest bad is really the cement content, and then everything else is a bonus, really.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Tony.
Bo. Thank you, Tony. Any other questions from the audience?
I was just going to say, Doi, because these are VicRoads mixes,
Yeah,
they are, they basically they're approved for use anywhere by anyone, so they're not tied to anything. That's the other benefit of a VicRoads mix. It's made to that standard, whereas a lot of the other high supplementary cementitious material mixes, they tend to be project, or what they call project mixes. So they'll be made up for a particular use in mind. So the Metro Tunnel will have theirs, the Westgate Tunnel will have theirs, but nothing wrong with them. But they're really what's called a project mix. So VicRoads mixes are vanilla. Anyone can use them.
yeah. No, it's great to know and point out that you can do this, even though it's not common practice yet. So hopefully after this, we'll see that mix showing up more. I now have a question from Luke Host. So Bo, based on your experience, can you talk to the concrete supplier market's ability to continue to innovate in the use of recycled materials?
I'll try. I don't work for them, so I don't really want to talk too much for them. But I think definitely there's a big appetite to innovate, and I think the industry absolutely recognises that it needs to innovate. But I think that there's a very solid other side to that coin, in that the industry is very much beholden to project timelines and budgets. So I think in order for them to be allowed to innovate, they need to be, I think, met almost halfway by projects to allow them to maybe spend more time or more budget or upgrading plant. One of the big issues we're facing now is that we've gone and we're starting to address another aspect of the concrete market, which is in precast concrete. So all the concrete I've been talking about here is what's called FRP, or form, reo, pour. So the stuff that gets delivered in a truck to site. There's a whole lot of other concrete which is precast, so columns, piers, beams, all that kind of stuff, or RE wall panels. And some of it's not too difficult to increase the SCM content in. Some of it's almost impossible. two examples. The easy one, or the easiest one, I think, is the reinforced earth wall panels. They're just flat panels. We've got a project up at the moment where we're confident that we're going to be getting a 50% SCM content in those RE wall panels, but that has had an impact on the time it takes to produce that panel, because it needs to sit for a little bit longer, because again, there's less cement in it. And from a cost point of view, you don't want to be putting in too many accelerants, because you need to strip that panel and have it dry off, and you need to be able to reuse the mold again and again and again and again at a very tight clip, because otherwise you're just not economical. The other one that's really, I think, is very tough is, say, for U-troughs or bridge beams, because they are precast, so pre or post tensioned. They have a very tight production schedule, and the concrete that they use in them is way over specified. And the reason they do, meaning it's got way too much cement, and they end up that they might need to be, say, a 55 MPa or a 50 MPa even, but they end up being like 60, 70. And the reason for that is because they put so much cement in there to make it hot and go off quickly, so they can strip it out of the mold, deliver it to site, and get it installed in a very short amount of time. If we are insisting on, say, putting more SCM in, that means that that time frame is going to extend. So they need to either make their yard bigger, which may not be possible because they are where they are, or we need to pay them more, or to hire somewhere to put them, because that absolutely is going to cost money, or we extend the construction program, where we know we can get this turnaround from industry, so we factor that into the construction delivery program. Say, 5 weeks for doing that section of bridge or that overpass, you might need to allow 7 weeks. That's a huge cost if you've got, say, rail occupations or stuff hanging around building stuff. It doesn't come free. So unless we meet halfway and go, you can innovate, but we also then need to, I don't know whether you call that innovation, more sort of like recognizing that innovation is not always without consequence. We might be in trouble.
Thank you, Boy. I think we're just about time, but I'll hand back over to Cheryl now. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I think there's one key takeaway from me, if anyone from the project's here, is to try and meet us halfway. So Cheryl, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Bo. Thanks, Doy, for your time. That was great. I think it's fabulous to be able to speak to people who are actually on the projects and get some of your experience. And that's the whole idea for this series. So next week, on Friday, the 5th of November, we're talking with Ecologics Project Implementation Manager, Luke Host, and he'll be talking to Reid Beauchamp, who is the Sustainability Manager on the Childs Road Upgrade Project. So Childs Road in Epping was among the first transport projects in Victoria to implement the Recycled First policy. So for all of those projects that are starting to implement this policy, this will be a great conversation, and Reid is very interested and very involved in that project. So once again, thank you for today. That was great. And thank you to everyone for attending. And we'll send out a notification for next week. Thank you.
Thanks.
Well done, Cheryl.
Oh, thanks. I'm just sorry. I've minimized this and now I'm trying to get it up. I need to stop the recording.
All good.
Pause. Oh, that's the share. I'll just stop the share.
Do you want me to hit stop? I can see it here.